The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to Spouses Talking Houses with husband and wife real estate team Jennifer and Brian Frost. Everything you want to know about buying, selling, investing, and owning property. So let's get real about real estate.
Welcome back to Spouses Talking Houses. I'm Jennifer.
And I'm Brian.
And today we are going to get real about researching properties from the comfort of your own home. So before we get to that, though, Brian, let's just talk a little bit about the realtor lifestyle now that we are not meeting people face to face.
Well, we're trying to keep busy here at home, and we're doing, I wouldn't say business as usual, but we're doing business to the best of our ability. Thing I'm working on this week is transitioning our website, and that's going to actually take me quite a bit of time with all the clients that we do have, but it's a good time to be doing it.
Yeah, and as you can see, we are recording the podcast from home. This is one of my usual spots for Zoom meetings as well. I don't think a day has gone by that I haven't had a Zoom meeting or two, which means that even though I'm working from home, I'm still getting up and grooming and getting dressed. That's a good thing.
Well, at least getting out of bed.
At least getting out of bed. I know. I'm thinking of turning the camera off and just lying in bed with my laptop for a Zoom meeting, but so far I've resisted.
Just get one of those backgrounds, like green screen or something.
I think they'll be able to tell I'm in bed. Anyway, one of the things that we want to talk about, which I think is appropriate right now, is, you know, when you are looking to buy a property, we want to do our due diligence and do research on the property. And there's quite a bit of that you can do from home and that we as realtors can do online. And I thought it would just be a good idea to have a list and an explanation of a bunch of different places that you can really stalk a property and find out a lot about it.
Well, I think most of our buyers are doing that already, which is a good thing. Sure.
Yeah. So what do they start with?
I mean, most people are going to start with Zillow or Realtor.com or any of these general search sites just to look at properties, look at pictures, look at maps, just to try to get to know an area or a neighborhood.
Yeah, and so all of those are fed by the MLS listing that the listing agent and listing office has put up. And you can go on to, your favorite agent's website, your Zillows, your Realtor.coms. Also, locally, the MLSs that we input our information into have a public-facing site. So in New Hampshire, our MLS is NAREN, N-E-R-E-N. And they have a public side of their site that you can go in and see everything that we've input. Same thing for MLS PIN in New Hampshire, MLSPIN, in Massachusetts. You can go into the public side of their site. And in addition to that MLS listing, they also a lot of times will have attachments that the agents have uploaded, including the property disclosures. So, we have an option when we upload those disclosures, whether they will be public or not. So the seller might not want their information, personal information, available to anybody and everybody. So they might ask that only the agents have access to that. In other cases, the documents are public. So you can look on those different sites for a document link to see if there are some attachments.
Yeah, and usually a little link for the documents, usually in the New Hampshire MLS anyway, the blue square with a D in it, and you click that link, and it'll bring up any of the attachments that are public. And usually they're going to be a tax card, a site plan, maybe a deed, items like that you can research. And like she said, also the seller's disclosure, which is very important for the potential buyer to look over.
So the sellers have some duties to disclose based on state law. And then there are forms that have been put together by the local state associations of realtors that the sellers will or will not fill out. So that particular form and format that we use is to standardize the questions and kind of cover a lot of the bases, but that's not necessarily a required form by the state. That's customary. So when we do have those, we like to pass them on, and it gives you a lot of information, and also, pre-answers questions that you might have about how old is the roof, when was the furnace last serviced, how much does your fuel consumption average during the winter. So if you are not seeing those attachments on the web along with the listing, reach out to your agent, reach out to us, and we will pull down whatever is attached and send it along to you.
Plus, we can do our own research. We can go on town websites and whatnot and pull tax cards, site plans. Many of the towns in both New Hampshire and Massachusetts have mapping GIS sites where you can put in the address of a property. It will zoom in on that property, show you frontages. You can put in different levels where it will show you zoning, or it will show you where there's public water, etc. And
school districts even sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other great thing is that you can usually pull up a satellite photo in the same GIS, so you can see the surrounding properties, the neighborhood, see if there are any, commercial properties or power lines, which you're never going to see on an MLS listing.
They're not going to be in the.
They're not going to mention that there are that there are power lines running through the backyard. But if you pull up the GIS, you might see that and say, "Oh, whoa, yes."
And another thing about looking at the GIS maps versus the Google Maps, because Google's great for Street View and aerial, etc. But when you look at the GIS maps, if they have a layer, they're called layers, that will show you elevation, you can see whether it's a flat lot or a steep lot, whether it's going uphill or downhill. Yeah, is it a steep driveway? So we're happy to do this type of research for our buyers, but we also want to let you know that this is public information. You can go in and find it. And most of the towns will have this available. You can look on the town website, generally under the tax assessors tab or the tax map tab, or a lot of times I'll just Google town name, state, GIS map. And so there are a handful of towns where we can't get that searchable GIS map. However, they do have PDFs of their tax maps. Yeah. Another thing to look at is the prior listing. If it's been on the market before, when it was last sold, a lot of that is aggregated on sites like Zillow, Trulia, and Realtor.com. We also have access to that through our MLS, so we can send you a little summary of it.
Sure, and you can see if the property sold a year ago or 2 years ago or last month. So that's always good to know.
Yeah, and especially when you're looking at a house that's had a lot of improvements and you might be curious about how long ago those were done. In some cases, we can access the older photos, but in other cases, for database reasons, the old photos have been stripped off and the old documents have been stripped off, and there's just that main photo of the house left.
Well, they're such poor quality that you really can't tell anyway.
So what's the other thing that you look at when you go to the town website?
Well, the most important thing to me as an appraiser is the tax card, which is basically a summary of the property. It gives you all the salient facts, anything from a lot size to home size to how many fireplaces it has, of course, bedrooms, baths, etc. It gives you the sales history of the property, of course, the assessment, how it's assessed, and not how it's assessed, but how it's broken down, the land value, the dwelling value, and any extra improvements such as a pool or whatnot. It basically gives you a good summary of any property that you want to look at.
And this is a good double check against the listing for any discrepancies between what the town has for public records on the tax card versus what is being put on the listing. Square footage is typically where I'll see a discrepancy.
Sure.
And it might have to do with calculation of square footage, or it might have to do with the fact that there's been some unpermitted work.
And the two biggest companies in New Hampshire anyway are Vision Appraisal or Vision Government Solutions, and also Avatar Associates. So you can actually go directly to either of those two websites, and it will give you a list of towns that they service.
Yeah, and then Patriot Properties.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Patriot Properties is also a large firm.
And some towns will have the tax cards in a searchable database on their website, or as you say, if you go to Avatar or Patriot, or what was the first one directly? Vision. Also, in some communities, when you search for a property on the GIS map and then you click on that property, it will have a little link that says documents, and then that will bring you to the tax card. So you need to get to know the different software and services that are being used.
They don't always make it the easiest process. And I mean, I know this. I mean, I'm doing it every day. I'm looking up several properties every day, and I'm like, wait, how do I get there? So yeah, sometimes it takes a little patience.
Yeah, it's okay to be patient. Another thing that you can look up online, at least in New Hampshire, I'm not as familiar with Massachusetts, is you can go to the DES site and do what they call a subsurface system search, and you can look for permits for septic installation and septic repair. Now that website is not, doesn't go back to the beginning of time. It mostly has stuff from the 90s forward. So that's one thing to know. The other thing to know is that, for example, our house is, 19 Victoria Drive. But back when that septic design was done, which is prior to the computerized database, but back when that was done, that was not the address of this house. At that time, this was a lot, and there was a house to be built. So if I go in and search under that address, I'm going to likely turn up 0 results. So I usually will, when I'm doing those queries, that's what they call them on the site. The state site's a little clunky. That's New Hampshire. They don't spend money on their technology, low tax, live free or die, et cetera, et cetera. But so when I'm searching for something, a lot of times, in addition to searching by the street address of the property, I will also search by the street name. I'll search within a date range, and you can search by map, tax map, and lot. I will search about 4 or 5 different ways until I find it. But it's really good information to have to know if there has been a new septic design, if there has been a septic repair in the last, for example, 30 years. We'll usually be able to find that online. Similarly, if you have some sort of a public water system or a community water system, you can access the water quality reports. It's called a CCR, Consumer Confidence Rule or Consumer Confidence Report, I'm not sure which, in New Hampshire, and that will show what testing has been done as required by the state for a public or community water supply.
Other searches we do on a regular basis are deeds. With deed info, you can look up liens, legal descriptions. For condos, you can look up master deeds. Often you can even get a copy of the exact floor plan as it was built. Just a lot of information that you can get. So in New Hampshire, it's newhampshiredeeds.com, I believe, will bring you to
the different counties.
Yeah, it'll give you. Then you go to the county that your property is in, and you go from there. Massachusetts is very similar. They have they're all broken up by the county. So if you have a book and page, that's great, but you can search by buyer or seller, grantor or grantee. You can search certain years. There's multiple search options to enable to find a deed.
And in Massachusetts, the county websites that I've gone to search for deeds and other land records have been completely free. You can download, you can print, etc. And in New Hampshire, there is usually you can search for free and view it for free, but if you want to download it or print it, there is a fee or a charge. Another thing is when I'm looking at a deed, I will go ahead and look at the previous book and page, and I will also see if they reference any sort of a subdivision plan. Because if you look up the subdivision plan, you're going to find a survey from when that lot was first recorded or created. And a lot of times that's not something that the homeowner has. It's not something that the listing agent has. And we can go ahead and access it right from our living room. Yeah. There are also websites where you can look at things that are not property specific, but are area specific. So you can look at the DOT's website to look at what's going on with highway expansion. You can look at the airport websites to see what the flight paths are. And you can also take a look at various sites to see if there are any sex offenders in the area that are on Megan's list. These are all items that the seller of the property has no obligation to disclose because they're not physically part of that property. They're in the surrounding area. And so that's up to you to do your due diligence on that. Yeah. Similarly, you can look up whether a property is in a flood zone or not. I usually just go to floodsmart.gov and then I type in the address and it pulls it up. Common misconception is that some homes are in flood zones and some are not. The fact is that all of the U.S. has been mapped and every single property is in a flood zone. It's just that it's a difference of whether you're in a high risk or a low risk or a medium risk flood zone. So when we talk about properties being in a flood zone, that commonly means high risk and requiring special insurance. Same thing with the EPA. You can type in an address of a property, and right on the EPA website, you can see what any of the local EPA sites are. And then if you're using the map-based search, you can click on those and it'll give you an explanation of that project, what it was, what the contamination was, what the status of the site is. And there was a lot of remediation done starting in the 70s and 80s. And so in this area, a lot of times when I'm finding them near a property, I'm finding out that it's an issue that was resolved years ago, which is comforting, I guess. Sure. Yeah. You can also just do a Google search on the property. It's mostly going to come up with the listings, so you might want to look under news. But if you want to know if there was, an unnatural death in that property, that is not required to be disclosed on the property disclosure. It is required that you get a truthful answer if you ask the question. If you don't ask the question, you're not going to know. So if there's a notorious property, you might just want to Google it, see if it comes up.
Sure, it'll be right up there at the top.
Yeah, I would imagine. Pam Smart's condo has sold a couple of times since that case originally happened, and yeah. I'm not sure anybody knows what that address is anymore. I don't.
I did know it, but I've forgotten.
Exactly. Also, through your insurance agent, you can find out if there is a clue report on a property. So a clue report is some sort of homeowners insurance underwriting database. And it basically just says if there have been previous claims on that property. And from what I understand, in the few times that we've had this come up on properties, it's been something as simple as fire claim, and the cost to remediate was $5,000. So it doesn't tell you what it is, but it tells you that there's questions to be asked.
Plus, your insurance rate could be very high, and you might not know the reason. And the reason could be because the former owner had, 5 or 6 claims on the property over a 10-year period. So that's going to be a red flag.
And that also reminds me, to go back to the tax cards. The tax cards, when you look at the physical tax card, not usually usually there's a computer summary, but then there's a place where you can go and click and look on the actual document, physical tax card.
It gives you more detail.
It gives you more detail, and it also has some notes of when the assessor has made changes to the property. And so, for instance, when we file for a tax abatement on our previous house, one of the things that we said to justify the reduction in taxes was we sometimes get water in the basement and our second floor does not have heat. And so those are now right there in the notes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
it also might tell you when they last inspected the property, when they actually were able to gain
physically
access
in
to
there,
the interior of the home, because often they don't get access.
Yeah. So I think that pretty much covers what we can do online. In different times when the town halls are open and we're able to go inside and take a look at the folders, we like to go in and take a look at the building department folder. The thing about looking at the folders in the building and or the zoning department or both is there will be some interesting information in there, but you don't know what information exists that was never filed or was misfiled or what have you. So I never assume that those are complete files.
No. Run into a number of surprises when you look into those files.
But I do run into some interesting stuff and letters from disputes over fences, from 30 years ago. But we do see if things have been permitted, if there have been issues. The other thing would be you can take a look at the tax bill. That you mostly just want to do to verify A, that the correct tax information is on the listing, and B, whether that current homeowner is getting some sort of a tax break that you are not going to be eligible for. So if somebody is getting an elderly exemption or a veteran's exemption, the current tax bill that they have is going to change after you move in if you don't qualify for those exemptions. We can get, most of the tax bills are available online. However, some of them you have to be the homeowner in order to log in and get them. And others, just about anybody can get them and download them. So if you can't access it, you might be able to ask the listing agent to get the seller to get it.
And just to go back to the building department, here in New Hampshire, where most properties are going to have septic systems, except for the cities, building department will, not always, but I'd say probably 60, 70% of the time, will have a septic plan actually in the file, and if not a plan, they'll have a permit that shows when the system was installed, have there been any repairs, etc. But it's always great to have to get a copy of that septic system. It also helps the septic inspectors when they come out, so they can see where supposedly that leach field is or where the holding tank is.
Yeah, and I like to check and see how many bedrooms was that septic design approved for. If it's a 5-bedroom home with a 3-bedroom septic, it's really a 3-bedroom home. It's an issue, and usually these are things that can be worked through. But if you don't have the information, you don't know that there's an issue. So hopefully you found this helpful. I'd also like to just quickly ask Brian to give us a quick market update.
Sure. It is April 2nd today, 2020, and we've been tracking, market activity with the COVID-19 situation. We're about a month into it here.
Yeah.
Maybe only 3.5 weeks, really. But
forever. It's only just
day to day, hour to hour. But anyway, so as of April 1st, for our local market area, which is, we're going to call it Greater Londonderry, but this includes Londonderry, Derry, Manchester, Wyndham, Litchfield, Hampstead, Chester, Auburn, Salem, Pelham, Nashua, Merrimack, Bedford, and Sandown. In the last 7 days, there have been 144 new listings, 159 closings, 132 put under contract. So business is still occurring. It might not be occurring at the rate it was this time last year, but we're just changing the way we do business. We're doing more things virtually.
Yeah.
And
And in past, I never would have looked at a 7-day snapshot. I would have preferred to look at a 3-month, 6-month, 1 year, because the bigger numbers I have, the more I can see what the trends are. but where this is something that's coming on rapidly and hopefully is going to move through quickly as well, this is an opportunity for us to see, wow, how is the market reacting this week versus last week? So, so those are really good numbers, and it's good for us to track. And I think those are healthy numbers. And I also like how, the new listings, the closings, and the under contracts are all in the same general range. So it's showing that supply and demand and absorption are still staying fairly level. We do hope you enjoyed this opportunity to get real about real estate. Please like, subscribe, and share Spouses Talking Houses with your friends, family, neighbors, and your local pharmacist. If you like the show, we'd be grateful if you leave a review. We listen to your feedback, and reviews help others find the podcast. Speaking of which, you can find us on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever your favorite podcatcher is. We will be there for you, and we really appreciate this opportunity. So have a great week.
Music courtesy of the Eric Lindbergh Trio. Please visit his website at www.ericlindberghworld.com. Jennifer and Brian are licensed to practice real estate in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Brian is also a certified general appraiser in New Hampshire. They are not lawyers, accountants, home inspectors, or therapists. Real estate customs and rules may be different in your area. Each Keller Williams Realty office is independently owned and operated. The realtor name is trademarked to members of the National Association of Realtors. If you are currently under contract with a real estate agent, this is not intended as a solicitation. Views expressed on this podcast by Jennifer may not be shared by Brian and vice versa, nor are they necessarily the views of Keller Williams Realty.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.